When you feel more than you can say, when words fail you, when syntax and grammar and well-constructed expressions are choked from your mind, and all that's left is raw feeling, a few broken words come forward. I'd like to believe those words, when everything's stripped away, might be the key to it all. This is AMI Audiobook Review, the weekly podcast where we chat all things audiobooks. I'm your host, Ramya Amudan. This quote, which, wow, really hit me, and we're going to talk more, not just about the quote, but about the book that it came from in detail later on with Aamer Khan, who joins us with his reviews at the end of the month. But for the time being, it is from My Oxford Year, and this is a novel by Julia Whelan, and it is available on Sela. Speaking of Sela, let's get into that home page. I don't think I need to say anything more about that quote, by the way. It's just is what it is written as it is, beautifully and complex, and hit me. There, I said I would say nothing and I continued. Let's talk about the three featured titles on the Sela homepage. If you go to celalibrary.ca, that's the Center for Equitable Library Access, and they have all kinds of books for your liking. Ebooks, audiobooks, and anything in Daisy format that you may want to check out. The three titles that are up there right now are The Whispers by Ashley Audrain, and the conversation about The Whispers is coming your way very, very soon. It's a suspense and thrillers. If you want to read along with us to join us for the conversation next week, you got it. Also, The Wager by David Graham is up there. This is a history. And the last one up there is The Misses by E.L. James, a romance book. And these are the three featured titles up there for the feature titles that Sela puts up, but you can continue to go through their categories, their award winners. You can also check out the Sela blog for more fantastic recommendations and listens that are curated and created for us. When we come back, we're chatting with Aamer Khan. He every month joins us at the end of the month, gives us his top 3 reads of the month, and actually sometimes it's not the top 3, sometimes it's this is what I read, and this is the book count for the month. But let's see what he has in store for us today. You're listening to AMI Audiobook Review, the weekly podcast where we chat all things audiobooks. And it is the end of the month. We shall check in with our audiobook worm, Aamer Khan. Today's theme, well, I don't know if you really call this a theme or just a one word per book, is Amnesia, Oxford, and Pakistan. So, Aamer, I don't even know if I should be asking you if there's a relevance between these three words anymore, other than the fact that they're the word to describe each book that you're highlighting today.
No, it's actually just pick 3, the continuing theme for this year, which is picking 3 authors or 3 books. In this case, 3 themes for the titles. So not too much shared between the two, nor did I try to figure out what might be relevant.
I know. That's your challenge for next month, okay? Interlock the 3 themes. Aamer loves to pick. You love to pick music for the book club to kick things off.
I do.
And yes, and those are always very fun. The titles or the content or sometimes just the party vibes. So, you know, this is going to be one of these challenges. What's the first book?
First book is called Restart by one of the authors I have spoken about before, a great young adult author named Gordon Corman, who's Canadian. A lot of people know his books and works. I've talked about some of his other books like Son of a Mobster and The Chicken Doesn't Skate and the MacDonald Hall series. This book is actually award-winning for young adults. So I wanted to see what it's about and how it's sort of different from the others I've read. And it is a very interesting plot for a young adult. And I'm always amazed at how Gordon Corman can sort of present topics in a way that's very palatable to young adults as well as to adults themselves. The theme of the book is basically a football star in junior high who's fallen off a roof and has suffered amnesia to the point where he cannot remember anybody but is still high functioning in terms of he knows how to do everything. He just doesn't know anything from his past. And as he starts to navigate his world in terms of going back to school and dealing with family, he slowly starts to get the feeling that in his previous life, he was a bully and a huge jerk. So it's this sort of discovery of knowing who you are and why you are and who you were before, and all of those kinds of themes and how you want to be going forward. Some really interesting characters throughout. This is not, a 5-page book for under 10 or something. It is definitely young adult. And it's just a nice little book to read in the summertime. It's something that's a little bit off the beaten path in terms of some of the other young adult sort of themes that you get.
Now, this kind of younger, lighter writing or content, is that normal for this author?
Yes, Gordon Corman is known
Typical?
for young adult. He usually straddles that line between the best definition is young adult, right? Between sort of going into adulthood is where he sort of excels. Son of a Mobster is more on the adult side, but definitely geared towards the teenage audience.
Right. And I guess the themes sometimes feel like they could go deeper. Is that just up to us, or does he put that right in there?
It's that medium sort of level of, it's not going to make you think too much if you don't want to, but if you want to start getting into, okay, well, what does that actually mean, and how is that, and examining certain characters, you can certainly do that.
Kind of cool. And when you say young adult, I always kind of stretch it. It could go younger, it could go older,
Right.
And especially because now this trend of YA novels, right? The fiction,
Yep.
contemporary YA novels seems to be just hitting. And so I think, like, can it go as young as it can go old? Like teens, preteens,
I think
be able to read this book?
to some degree. I mean, Amnesia is a fairly adult concept. Like somebody like a 6-year-old or 8-year-old probably not going to understand what the concept of amnesia in general. So I think this is more towards the junior high level and up. I guess you could take it as up as you want from there. But I think some of the sort of practical life, human science / health related stuff, people aren't going to really understand if they're not of a certain age.
Yeah, and at least we can all convince ourselves that we're still young adults, ongoing young adults.
Exactly. I don't feel bad at all about reading this book. This is a really cool book. And I've talked to people that are much older than me and describe the book, and they're like, that sounds amazing. I'm going to pick it up. And I'm like, okay, nothing to be embarrassed about now.
Yeah, the mini synopsis does sound very intriguing, especially when you're talking about flawed characters, right? Or characters who kind of maybe get a restart on life.
Yeah, and
clearly.
And I'm not purposely not going through all the characters in the book just because they are very well done with Corman. One of the characters in the book is actually the sister of the person he used to pick on the most, who actually left the city. His parents actually sent him away to boarding school because he was getting picked on so much by this football guy. And his sister has to deal with this guy coming back. And then, as children are, not a lot of the children were believing that he had amnesia in the first place. So that's another sort of interesting part of the book where Gordon Corman he's very good at sort of determining what the mentality of somebody of that age group would be and how much they would sort of understand and how much they were willing to believe, to the point where even his best friends are like, is he faking it because he's trying to get out of this thing or that thing? And these kinds of concepts. So
right. Yeah, that's really, I feel like this could be done so well, and we've seen it in film and other books, and just like that kind of pause. Oh wow, this can be a very bittersweet situation for somebody, and so we get to kind of be on that journey with them as the person who's not going through it. But very curious.
And I think the other thing Corman does well is just putting some abstract, ridiculous concepts in for comedic effect, which is fantastic. I'll go through one just to tease people to read the book. Is one guy who's part of the video club, and he's begging people to do this, to film him, to do a YouTube video that he wants to be viral for. And nobody wants to do it, and it ends up being him on a tricycle going through a car wash. So it's he has quite the imagination, Corman does.
Oh,
And
yeah.
it's always fun to see where it goes in the book.
Clearly, he's kind of willing to throw anything into the mix. That's so prevalent, even from just the teaser about what this book is. So
Exactly.
the second book, you toss it right in the middle. But would you say this is your favorite of the three you're gonna
Yeah,
pick?
this is actually one of my favorites in general in recent
Period.
times. Yeah, it's rare that I want to give a book a standing ovation when there's nobody to see it, but this book definitely deserves it. The book's title is called My Oxford Year by Julia Whelan. I reviewed her other book, Thank You for Listening, and we did it for Aamer's Evening Book Club last month, but
That was very popular, very well received.
and very well written. This is actually her debut novel, My Oxford Year, and it is outstanding. It is a love story. I guess if I had to classify, I would call it rom-com. But Julia Whelan herself is somebody who teaches literature and writing, and the main character in this particular book happens to be a Rhodes Scholar who is very literate and has a massive vocabulary. So if you're interested in that, this book is definitely for you. If you're not so great in the vocabulary department, this book still fits. It doesn't use it so much where you're lost or anything like that, but you get a good sense of the character and what she's after. The premise, which I will again try to shy away from giving too much away, because part of the fun of reading Julia Whelan is where she takes the storylines. But it basically starts with, as I said, a Rhodes Scholar from the United States who has been given an opportunity to be at Oxford as a Rhodes Scholar to study. And as she, gets to Oxford, hasn't even attended her first class, she gets a call up from a political party and campaign that she's been part of for years, that they want her to be one of the more important people in the party, and can she come back to the United States right now because she's running for president, the person that she had worked for previously as a lower functionary. So she has to balance these sort of priorities. And again, Julia Whelan does a fantastic job of mixing comedy, seriousness, real life situations as I described them. Just beautiful writer. She's a very talented narrator as well. I can't wait to pick up another book that's narrated by her. In the Sela collection, there's only 2 books written by her. I don't know if that's the entire length and breadth of her writing, but I know she's done more than that for narration. So absolute pleasure to read the book. It will make you laugh. It will make you cry, to use a cliche, but you'll be very satisfied after reading it. I doubt many people will be disappointed after reading this particular book.
Right, and most, as I said from the book club, most people loved Thank You for Listening, and then you decided to go back and check out her first book. So we already know, because we talk with you all the time, that you just go right into it. If you enjoyed something by an author, you're like, I'll pick up another book by this author, and then you'll say, hey, this author's actually consistently good. So with this one, were there any other books by her, or did you just go back?
In the Sela collection, I only saw these 2. I don't know if there's
Okay.
other books out there from her, but if there are, I'd love to read them.
Yeah, clearly we're putting it out there now. And of course, everything about it sounds great, and you included the narration in that. But was there particularly something about this book that tugs you as like, oh, she does this so well as an author, that stands out more than just like a book that was satisfying, was enjoying? Like, what makes this a peak favorite?
I think I enjoy being surprised. Thank You for Listening, and this particular book, she tells the story really well and leads you in certain directions, which is great. But in a lot of books, even if they're formulaic, it's about how they unfold that story. And Thank You for Listening, it's fairly obvious. It's going to be a romance and 2 people are going to fall in love, and this is not dissimilar, but there's a lot of other things going on where it just feels like an experience, and it feels like you're there. Again, the narration, all of these other elements that I talked about sort of package it together to be like you're like really in the character and looking through the character's eyes.
That's really interesting. Was there a lot of internal, introspective of characters in this book?
I think that she does that well too, in terms of explaining internal introspective very well of her characters
Mm-hmm.
about what they are looking for, what they are not looking for, and how they are thinking about certain situations. We saw that in Thank You for Listening. We see it here. And I think that's an interesting piece that she does too, because in a lot of the same situations, I think most of us would react a certain way.
Mm.
And her characters don't always react the same way. And she does a great job of actually explaining why.
Oh, that's a nice way. Like, that's a nice tactic to do it because, oftentimes we're relating to characters, but what if they aren't on the same wavelength that we are? How do we respond to that? Mm,
Exactly.
yeah, you got to ease us in. Okay, cool. So I'm definitely curious about this one too. And right before we started recording this, you were like, how you're not going to put this on the top of your to read list. So that's ours, like public. Everybody read this book.
Thanks.
You have one more.
I do. This is the most serious out of the bunch. This is definitely not a feel-good book. This is The Return of Faraz Ali by Amina Ahmed. And this is a much more historical fiction piece. This is looking at a particular character over quite a number of years. In this case, it's basically the Second World War, which is 1942-ish, right up to the formation of Bangladesh as a country, which is, I believe, the late 60s, if I'm not mistaken. So it's basically looking at a lifetime of this police officer. This is, like I said, not a feel-good movie. I would classify it as family story. It's an interesting book because from a storyline and story arc perspective, you're not really sure what you're getting. And again, the author's not trying to please you, which is an interesting concept. But the book is interesting. It's phenomenally written. You really do feel like you're there. Again, the police officer is a very interesting character to have as a central character in this particular time frame and time in this country's history. And there's a lot of a morality that he has to deal with in terms of what he's doing, why he's doing it, whether he can live with what he's done, and all these kinds of concepts. So you have this, police corruption theme running around. You have this politics running around. Again, this is also the years I mentioned. In between those years, you also had the separation of India and Pakistan. So he was around for that. The whole book starts off with a murder in the red light district of Lahore, Pakistan, which even for a lot of us that may have parents from there, we may not know that actually even existed back in the day, but it did, apparently. A lot of the things in this book is based on historical fact, although it is fiction. And his first sort of task when we open the book is to basically sweep this young murdered girl's murder under, basically sweep it and cover it up. And that's where his sort of morality struggles start. He has his own daughter, which also, propels him to be a little bit more moral than I think he would normally be. But a lot of real characters that, the characters switch in terms of perspective. It's just not him. You see him, his biological father, and there's a reason why I'm using that. Then there's a reason why the book is called The Return of Faraz Ali, because, he has a certain relationship with his biological father, but was never legitimized by him. Which is a theme we've seen a lot with in terms of, kings and monarchs and stuff, but we haven't really seen it in terms of a class structure piece, especially in sort of Asia and that particular part of the world. So that was interesting to me to see, for that particular region, it's usually steeped in a lot of religion and cultural pieces. To see a book about the cultural classes and how that worked from that time along, mixed in with the politics of that time, are just amazing to experience. I think this book might be a little bit difficult for somebody that's not from that part of the world. Sort of like Firekeeper's Daughter, where it's a book we read which is indigenous, where all sorts of indigenous words were thrown in. There are a lot of Urdu words thrown in this book from the author. Most of them are defined, so I don't think you have too hard a time. But again, if you've never really experienced any of India or Pakistan's culture, this book is probably going to be a bit difficult for you to get your head around.
Is that just a grasp of, us being pretty, potentially being ethnocentric and then not being able to kind of step outside our own experiences and backgrounds and philosophies to understand this as something that goes on? Because it's history still, right?
It's history still, but there is a lot of culture that's in this book that, again, they say certain words or phrases, and if you're not familiar with
so
them...
So it's more tactile and literal.
Tactile and literal, and the author has a habit of doing some, what I call unsaid writing. She doesn't do it too much, but there are some authors that will literally, I think Jane Austen is one of them from Pride and Prejudice, where, she'll say one thing, but
still stuck in your head, huh?
Well, I did finish it, though. I did finish it.
Good.
But, the authors say one thing, but they mean another. Or the author will say something, or the author will literally write in the book, to say something of the effect that, and it lied, and the truth lay between them, but they don't tell you what the actual truth.
Right.
So the author does do a little bit of that, but not to the point where, you're frustrated and you're like, what is this about? But again, from a cultural context, you sort of get it because those types of things are taboo and you don't really talk about them. So it's an interesting mix of that too, in terms of this book, because the whole book is about all sorts of taboo subjects, which are taboo in that part of the world, in terms of red light district and, of prostitution and these types of things. And then on some occasions, she's choosing not to even name certain things. So it's an interesting book. Somebody asked me if how gruesome it is and how sort of deep down the rabbit hole you get with some of this stuff. And I'd say an R rating is probably about right for this one. It's definitely not something you want, 13-year-old or something like that to be reading. But at the same time, it's not icky, and it doesn't go down the horror sort of line of things where it's describing in detail, torture scenes or anything. It doesn't go into any of that.
Yeah, it's interesting, right? Like when you kind of rate books this way, or feel tempted to, and wonder but what would make us say this? Is it the philosophies? Is it the violence and the bloodshed? Or is it just, contextualizing something for a kid, which can be very difficult? And these are, do we take on that accountability?
Yeah, and there's some very adult concepts here too, right? About what you can live with and what you can't live with, of being coerced into something, of the concept of just pure survival in the most sort of naked sense of the word, in terms of being able to live. Survivor's guilt is there too, in terms of there's concept of POWs and the mentality that goes with that. It's interesting because the book also takes the perspective of his father in the Second World War. So his experiences of going through that, and he becomes a politician. So how that sort of comes to be, and what war does to people. These concepts of families and what that does to people, about our own central character who doesn't feel all that connected to his family because he has issues with not knowing his own biological family. So you have all these themes, and when I look at books in terms of ratings and things, I always think, would I recommend this book to somebody else?
Right.
And this is one of these books where, if you're interested in politics and a little bit harder read, in terms of family stories and sort of these sort of man versus yourself kind of concepts, this is a good book to read.
Yeah.
And then the second question that somebody will probably ask me is, where did you find this book? So I found this book, actually, it's part of the, I mentioned this earlier, NPR did an article about 14 books that will take you around the world.
Okay.
The Red Palace was on this list by June Herr, which I read, which I really enjoyed. And that's definitely a feel-good book. This one was on the list as well. So I took it up. I was a bit squeamish given the synopsis and the title.
Yes.
I knew it was not going to be a fun book in terms of, something I would be raving about in terms of, oh, you have to read this because it's so fun. But again, the author is talented. This is her first book as well. which I found amazing. It is put together quite well. And, again, from the quote that you opened with as well.
Exactly. No, definitely for writing and skilled phrasing. That quote is an example. But, you've been definitely coming out of your comfort zone with some of the books you've been choosing to read in the last year or so. And maybe that's just the influence of, hey, we're all in together with book club. And sometimes that's really helpful. But it's great to get these reviews at the end of the month with you, Aamer. That's a wrap. Aamer Khan joins us at the end of the month with some of his 3 picks. Not some, definitely 3. And that's it for this week's episode of AMI Audiobook Review. I'm Ramia Ahmedin, the host of the show, with Nisreen Abdel Majid, our technical producer. Until next week, happy audiobook listening.